Alright, so let's read the question, shall we? So, okay, you can use whatever kind of solving strategies you want. You can use drawing in numbers in your explanations, but you must explain what you're doing and why you did it. So a pattern of dots is shown below. At each step, more dots are added to the pattern. The number of dots added at each step is enough to allow the pattern of dots to continue to grow in the manner shown. The pattern continues forever, infinitely. Alright, so why don't you take a crack at that first question there, letter A.
Well, after each step, there's one more row to the right and one more row down. So the fourth step would be 6 to the right and 4 down.
So 6 to the right and 4 down?
Yeah.
Why?
Because there's one more row to the right and one more row down after each step.
Okay, so each step you're adding one dot to the end and then adding a full row of dots that match that?
Yeah.
Okay. So how would you write that?
You would do 6 dots to the right, and then below that do that 3 more times. So there'd be 4 rows down and 6 rows to the right.
That's for the fourth step?
Yeah.
Okay, so how would you say that for just in general? So like if you had to say to continue this pattern in some way, what would you say? You would just say you just add. What would you say instead of adding a certain number of rows? What would you say in general? Like if we look at the third step compared to the second step, what did we do to get to that step? We just added one more row and one more. How would you explain that? Okay, I'm being confusing. So, I don't know, read letter A.
Describe the change that takes place to get from one step to the next.
Which you did. And then make your description in general terms.
Okay.
So like let's say I'm at the 59th step and I want to get to the 60th step. What do I do?
You would add a row and add a column.
Okay, so those are your general terms. So write that down. Perfect. Alright, so letter B. Marcy has to determine the number of dots in the 20th step, but she does not want to draw out all 20 pictures and then count the dots. Her friend told her that there were 399 dots in the 19th step. How can she use this to find the number of dots in the 20th step? If you need extra paper, I have some extra paper too. Or you know what, you can, yeah, I'll get some extra paper for you. So what kind of information are we given in this?
The 399 dots in the 19th step.
Okay. What else do we need to do? So given that, what do we need to do? How did we find the number? Like, okay, let's look back at our first 3 steps. Okay, what else do we know other than adding a row and a column? What else do we know about those pictures?
They're
How many dots are there?
3 in the first step, 5 and 5, well, 5 extra, so 8 in the second step.
5 extra. Did you
Yeah.
count those dots, or how did you find that?
Yeah, I counted.
Okay, that's cool.
And then in the third step, there's 15 dots.
How did you know that without counting?
I did 3 times 5, which is the row times the column.
Okay, so you found the area of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, using that kind of information, so you said you multiplied the row by the column, right?
Yeah.
Huh. All right, let's look at B again. If you're looking at the 20th step, okay, what do we notice about you always want to refer back to these patterns. Okay, and a useful thing is to write down everything that you're discovering. So like 3 dots and so forth. Other than drawing a picture, do you know any other good strategies that you could use to maybe organize what you're finding?
You could keep adding rows and columns to until you have 399, and then add another one.
Okay, that is one way to do it, but are we drawing out every row and column when we do that?
Yeah.
So the question's asking us how to do that without drawing it. So what else could we do?
Well, the first step has 3, and then you add 1 for each time, so you could do 3 plus 20, and then you add a column every time, so you do 1 plus 20, and the row, there would be 23 columns and 21. Wait.
How about
Yeah,
write it down
21.
so you don't get lost. That's an interesting way to look at it. So you're saying the first step plus 20.
Well, the column plus 20 and rows plus 20.
Is the columns. Okay, so you're taking the base step, and then you're saying since we add 1 row and 1 column for each step, you can just add 20 rows and 20 columns for the 20th step.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then the 20th step would be 23 times 21. Which equals
Yeah, sorry, I don't have a calculator.
483.
483. Do you think that makes sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
kind of.
Well, instead of looking at this first step, let's look at the second step too. Okay, so in the second step, how many columns are there?
4.
4 columns. Okay, so let's try your and then third step there's 5 columns. So let's try your method for the fourth step. Okay, so let's take the first step plus whatever you're doing. So we're just checking your answer, basically. We're going to try it for a smaller.
So you would add a column to the third step and a row to the third step. And there's 4 times 6 dots, which is 24.
Okay. Now, let's check that with how you found it for the 20th. For the 20th step. So you said you start with the first step, and since we're on the fourth step now, we add 4 rows, right?
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah. Well,
So how many columns do we have in the first step?
3.
3. And then how many columns do we have in the fourth step?
6.
6. So using your method, you said we take that 3 and we add 4 columns because it's the fourth step, right? So how many columns should we have using your method?
Well, the fourth step would be 6. Or
I'm asking,
3.
using what you used, okay? For the 20th step, you said you take 3 columns plus 20 more, right? Because it's the 20th step. So you're saying we add 20 more dots.
It'd be 19 because you already have the first step.
What would be 19?
You'd be 1 step plus 19. Or 1 column or row plus 19 columns and rows.
So, okay, let's forget about this 20th step for now. Does what you're saying work for the fourth step?
No.
No. Because if we use what you said, we should have 7 columns, right?
Yeah.
Because we're starting with the 3 and we're adding 4 more columns. No. So let's try. So do you think that 483 makes sense?
No.
Alright, so let's try and look at it a different way. That was a very interesting way to look at it. I really like that, actually. I had to check it because it sounded really good. Seriously. So, we have 3 columns, right? And we have 1 row for the first step. In the second step, we have 4 columns, we have 2 rows. Third step, we have 5 columns and 3 rows. And in the fourth step, we have 6 columns and 4 rows. So did you notice anything there?
Mm. I don't know.
You don't know. Well, what's a way we can what's a way that you organize data? How can we get this so instead of just thinking of it all in our head, we can write it down, neat and organized?
Make a graph.
Make a graph. Okay, how do you make a graph?
Well, it's
Not like I mean, when I say make a graph, I don't mean specifically drawing the graph, but like how do we find what goes on that graph?
in the steps.
In the steps. Okay. How?
Well, if you did the first step, which is 3 dots, and then you'd put the second step is 8, and then the third is 15.
Can you show me on paper?
Yeah.
You're such a tiny writer.
The first step would be 3, so it'd go here.
Okay.
And then second is 8, so it'd go up here. The third is 15. And it'd be here.
Okay.
So could you go like that until it goes to the 20th step?
I don't see why not. Okay, but instead of seeing it like this, how else could we visualize that? What's another way of writing what you just did?
A bar.
No, not the type of graph. What usually goes with a graph?
A table.
A table. There you go. Can we organize our data in a table?
Yeah.
How would we do that? You just did it right here. You have the dots over here. Okay, so you have the total number of dots here, and you have the steps here. Steps. How do you write that upside down? Good. So then how can we organize that into a table?
Could do the steps times the dots, and then
Well, we don't multiply. What axis is this?
at y,
What axis is this?
x.
X. So when you make a table of values for an x and y, how do you do that?
Well, for the
Like we have these points 1, 3, 2, 8, 3, 15. How'd you show those points in a table? Because we can look at a table and draw the graph, right?
yeah. You could,
So in this case, what would the x be?
3.
Okay, but like, what does x represent in our data set?
Steps.
Right. So your steps. Okay.
That'd be 1. And then the y would be dots, which is 3. And then step 2 is 8. Step 3 is 15 dots. And step 4 is 24.
So do we know what step 5 would be based on our table and graph? Well, what's something else we can add to our table?
5.
Okay, we can keep going, but do we know what y will be without an equation?
No.
We can try and guess an equation from these values that you've already found, right? But instead of doing that, we can extend our tables, right? We don't have to have just 2 values. So for graphing x and y values, it's great to have 2, but we can also extend it to include other things. It's just a way of organizing our data. So what else do you think we could add to our table?
Rows or columns.
Yeah. So let's try that.
So in step 1, there's 1 row and 3 columns.
Good.
In step 2, there's 2 rows and 4 columns. Step 3, there's 3 rows and 5 columns. Step 4, there's 4 rows and 6 columns. So it'd be the row times column equals the number of dots.
Yep. And we kind of already said that too, because that's like finding, 3 times 5 would be our 15, right?
Yeah.
So it's our area. So yeah, very good.
Yeah.
So what's our 5th step?
There'd be 5 rows and 7 columns.
Okay.
So there'd be 35 dots.
Good. So we can see a pattern here, right? So instead of, trying to multiply out every single step value, okay? Instead of going all the way up from 1 to 20, can we figure out the relationship between the steps and the information in our table?
You could keep going with the rows or columns until you get to 20, or you could put 20 rows, because 1 column plus 19 more, which would make the 20th step, would be 20. Well, 1 plus 19 would be 20 rows, and at the start there's 3 columns, so you would add 19 to that, and there would be 22 columns.
Okay. So how many dots would there be?
Well, you do 20 times 22, which is 440.
Good. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Think so? Okay. So using this method, what's a way we might be able to check that? Using part B. Okay, so let's check that. Let's try the 19th step
Okay.
and see if we come up with 399.
So the 19th step would be 21 columns and 19 rows, and 19 times 21 is 399.
So did you find it correctly?
Yeah.
All right. So for part B, you can write it on the back of this if you want. Kind of explain what you have to do in order to find the 20th step. Explain how she can use the 19th step to get to the 20th step. Write it down for me, please.
If you knew how many rows and columns there were in the 19th step, you could add one and then multiply them together.
Okay. Good. Okay, so let's look at part C. Marcy's teacher knows that her friend helped her, so she asked her to explain or show how she could find the number of dots in the 30th step without drawing all 30 pictures. Explain how Marcy can do this and give the answer that Marcy should get for the number of dots in the 30th step.
You could go from the 20th step and add a row and column, or add 10 rows and columns to get to the 30th step. So there'd be 30 rows and 31 columns. Wait, no, 32 columns. And 30 times 32 is 960 dots.
Okay. So can you write an answer for that, explaining what you just did?
Okay.
Alright. How about this last question? So does any step in this pattern contain exactly 1,000 dots?
I don't think there does, because there's the 30th step has 960 dots, and before, from the 20, wait, They added more than 40 from the 29th step to the 30th.
How do you know they added more than 40?
Because I figured out that 29 steps would be 870 dots, and you add more than what you did before each time, so the 31st step would be more than 1,000.
Okay. What would the 31st step have? How many would the 31st step have?
Well, the 31st step would have 31 rows and 33 columns. So 31 times 33 is 1,023.
So you were right. I think you wrote that in the wrong column.
Oh.
Alright, awesome. Smart kid.